How can one playful night with an old friend lead to a public, legal fallout? What starts as a little secret turns into a moment where a stranger stands at my door, handing me papers I never thought I'd see. Can you really call someone the villain if they only followed the law after you broke all the rules? I'm Evanthe, and I thought I knew how this story would end. I was wrong about everything. The bass was thumping through the downtown club speakers when I spotted him across the crowded dance floor. Rafa Torres. The same charming smile, the same easy confidence that had caught my attention back in college. It had been years since we'd seen each other, but when our eyes met, it felt like no time had passed at all. Evanthe, no way. He pushed through the crowd, arms already open for a hug that lasted just a beat too long. Rafa, what are you doing here? I could feel the excitement bubbling up inside me, that old familiar flutter I hadn't felt in months, maybe years. Event promotion. This is actually my gig tonight. He gestured around the packed club with obvious pride. What about you? Still with that computer guy? I glanced back toward our table where Caleb sat nursing his beer, scrolling through his phone with that same detached expression he'd worn for months. Yeah, still married to the computer guy, I said, but my tone must have given something away. Trouble in paradise. Rafa's voice was playful, but his eyes were searching my face. Not trouble, just boring. You know how it is. I shrugged, already feeling guilty for the admission but unable to stop myself. He's not exactly the dancing type. Well, I am. Rafa extended his hand with that grin that used to make my heart race. One dance, for old time's sake. I looked back at Caleb again. He was still absorbed in his phone, completely oblivious to the fact that his wife was being asked to dance by another man. Would it kill him to pay attention to me for once? To act like he actually wanted to be here? Just one dance, I said, taking Rafa's hand. But one dance became two, then three. The music was intoxicating, and Rafa's hands on my waist felt electric in a way that Caleb's touch hadn't for longer than I cared to admit. We moved together like we had back in college, all chemistry and heat and reckless abandon. God, I missed this, I breathed into his ear during a particularly intense song. Missed what? His lips were close enough to my ear that I could feel his breath. Feeling alive. When I finally made it back to our table, Caleb was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not angry, not hurt, just observing, like he was taking mental notes. Having fun? He asked quietly. Just catching up with an old friend, I said, sliding into the booth beside him. My heart was still racing from the dancing, from Rafa's hands on my body, from the way he'd looked at me like I was the most desirable woman in the room. You remember Rafa from college, right? I remember. Caleb's voice was neutral, but something in his tone made me defensive. We were just dancing, Caleb. It's not a crime. I didn't say it was. But the way he said it, so calm, so measured, made me feel like he was judging me anyway, like he was being deliberately boring just to make me feel guilty for having a good time. Before we dive deeper into the story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My sister Lydia appeared at our table then, slightly out of breath from her own dancing. She took one look at my flushed face and Caleb's carefully neutral expression and raised an eyebrow. Everything okay over here? Fine, I said quickly. I was just dancing with Rafa. You remember him from college? He's the event promoter for tonight. Lydia's eyes flicked between Caleb and me. Right. Well, maybe we should think about heading home soon. It's getting pretty late. Actually, I think I'm ready to go, Caleb said, already reaching for his wallet. Come on, the night's still young, I protested. But even as I said it, I could see Rafa across the room, surrounded by a group of admirers. The spell was already breaking. The ride home was quiet except for the radio playing softly in the background. Caleb drove with his usual careful precision while I stared out the window, replaying every moment of those dances with Rafa. The way he'd pulled me close, during the slow songs, the way his eyes had lingered on my face, the way he'd whispered that he'd missed me. "You were different tonight," Caleb said suddenly as we pulled into our apartment complex. "Different how?" "Happier, more yourself." I turned to look at him, surprised by the observation. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing, just an observation." But it wasn't nothing, and we both knew it. As we walked up to our apartment in silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between us. And later that night, as I lay in bed next to my husband's sleeping form, I found myself thinking about Rafa's hands on my waist and wondering what might have happened if Caleb hadn't been there watching. I should have recognized the danger in that thought. I should have seen the way Caleb had been watching, not with jealousy or anger, but with the same methodical attention he brought to debugging code or organizing our finances. I should have understood that my husband's silence wasn't indifference, it was calculation. But I was too caught up in the intoxicating memory of feeling wanted, feeling alive, feeling like the woman I used to be before marriage and routine and predictability had dulled all my edges. The next morning, I woke to find Caleb already up, sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop and a cup of coffee. He was making notes in one of his little notebooks, the ones he used for everything from grocery lists to work projects. "What are you working on?" I asked, pouring myself coffee. "Just organizing some things," he said without looking up. I noticed he'd written the date at the top of the page, and below it, what looked like a timeline. But when I tried to get a closer look, he closed the notebook and stood up. "I'm going to shower," he said. "We should probably do something today. Maybe go see your sister." "Sure," I agreed, but I was still thinking about that notebook, about the careful way he'd closed it when I'd tried to look, about the expression on his face the night before when he'd watched me dance with another man. For the first time, I wondered if my husband's silence was more dangerous than his anger would have been. The atmosphere in our apartment had shifted in the weeks following that night at the club. It wasn't anything dramatic. Caleb didn't yell or confront me or demand explanations. Instead, he became even more methodical, even more organized, even more quietly observant than usual. I found myself checking my phone constantly, hoping for messages from Rafa. When they came, casual texts about grabbing coffee or meeting up for drinks, I felt that same electric thrill I'd experienced on the dance floor. It was harmless, I told myself. We were just friends catching up. "Going out again?" Caleb asked one evening, as I touched up my lipstick in the hallway mirror. "Just meeting Rafa for coffee. You know, catching up on old times." He didn't look up from the folder he was organizing at the kitchen table. Everything was sorted into neat piles: bills, bank statements, insurance documents. "What old times are those?" Something in his tone made me defensive. "College, obviously. We have a lot of shared memories." "I'm sure you do. What's that supposed to mean?" Caleb finally looked up, and his expression was perfectly calm. "Nothing. Have fun." But it felt like something. It felt like judgment, like he was keeping score of every time I left the apartment, every time I came home smelling like someone else's cologne, every time I smiled at my phone while reading a text. "You're being weird, Caleb," I said, grabbing my purse. "It's like you're watching me all the time." "I'm not watching you, I'm just paying attention." The distinction felt important somehow, though I couldn't put my finger on why. That night, when I came home from what had definitely been more than just coffee with Rafa, I found that Caleb had moved his things into the guest room. His pillow, his alarm clock, even his reading glasses were all neatly arranged on the nightstand. "What's this about?" I asked, standing in the doorway. "You were tossing and turning a lot lately. Thought you might sleep better with more space." It was a reasonable explanation, but it felt like a punishment, like he was withdrawing from me just when I needed to know that he still cared, still wanted me, still saw me as worth fighting for. "Caleb, if you're upset about something, just say it." He looked up from the book he was reading, some technical manual about database management. "I'm not upset. I'm just giving you what you seem to want. What I want? Space, freedom, the chance to figure out what makes you happy. The words should have been kind, understanding even. But the way he said them, so measured and distant, made them feel like a trap, like he was documenting my behavior for some future reference. I started noticing other things too. The way he'd started writing in that notebook every morning, always closing it when I entered the room. The way he'd begun organizing our financial documents with unusual intensity, creating files and folders for things that had never needed organizing before. The way he'd started taking photos of receipts and saving them in carefully labeled envelopes. Are you planning something? I asked him one morning, watching him sort through a stack of bank statements. Always planning something, he said mildly. That's what I do. I mean something specific, about us. He paused in his sorting and looked at me directly. What would I be planning, Evanthe? The way he said my name, so formal, so careful, sent a chill down my spine. But I pushed the feeling away. I was being paranoid. Caleb wasn't the type for grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. He was methodical, yes, but he was also passive. He'd never been the kind of man to take decisive action about anything, especially not our marriage. My sister Lydia called that afternoon while I was at work, gossiping with my coworker Nate about my friendship with Rafa. You need to be careful, she said without preamble. Hello to you too, Lydia. I'm serious, Evanthe. I've been thinking about the other night at the club, and something felt off about the way Caleb was watching you. He wasn't watching me. He was ignoring me, like always. No, he was definitely watching. And taking notes. Taking notes? I laughed, but it sounded forced even to my own ears. What is he, a detective? He's a man whose wife is flirting with another man in public. And he's smart, Evanthe. Smarter than you're giving him credit for. I glanced over at Nate, who was making exaggerated kissing faces at me. He'd been encouraging my friendship with Rafa from the beginning, calling Caleb boring and saying I deserved some excitement in my life. You're being dramatic, I told Lydia. Caleb's not some mastermind plotting revenge. He's a software analyst who color codes his sock drawer. Those are exactly the kind of people you should worry about, Lydia said. They don't do anything without a plan. But I didn't want to hear it. I was tired of everyone treating me like I was doing something wrong, when all I was doing was enjoying the company of an old friend who made me feel attractive and interesting and alive. Caleb had checked out of our marriage emotionally years ago. Why shouldn't I be allowed to find that connection elsewhere? That evening, I came home to find Caleb in his study, surrounded by even more paperwork than usual. The room looked like a command center, with documents spread across every surface and sticky notes marking various pages. What's all this? I asked, trying to keep my voice light. Just getting organized, he said, the same response he'd been giving for weeks. But this didn't look like organization. It looked like preparation. Like he was building something, gathering evidence, creating a case. Caleb, are you thinking about leaving me? He stopped writing and looked up at me with those calm, analytical eyes. Are you thinking about leaving me? No, of course not. Why would you even ask that? Because you've been spending a lot of time with Rafa lately, and you seem happier when you're with him than when you're with me. The observation stung because it was true. I was happier with Rafa. He made me laugh, made me feel desirable, made me remember who I used to be before I became half of a couple that had stopped really seeing each other. He's just a friend, Caleb. I know. His voice was perfectly neutral. You've mentioned that. But the way he said it made it clear he didn't believe me. And the worst part was, I wasn't sure I believed it anymore either. That night, lying alone in our king-size bed while my husband slept in the guest room, I stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out when everything had gone so wrong. When had we stopped talking? When had we stopped touching? When had we become strangers sharing an address? And why did it feel like Caleb was 3 steps ahead of me in a game I didn't even know we were playing? The second video went viral on a Tuesday. I hadn't meant for it to happen. Rafa and I were just having drinks at the rooftop bar downtown, laughing about old college stories, when someone at a nearby table started filming. The song that came on was one we'd danced to that first night at the club, and when Rafa pulled me up to dance, it felt natural to move into his arms. What I didn't realize was that the person filming had caught more than just our dance. They'd captured the way Rafa's hands lingered on my waist, the way I leaned into him during the slow parts, the way we looked at each other like we were the only two people in the world. And in the background, barely visible but unmistakably present, was Caleb, sitting alone at a corner table, watching everything with that same calm, analytical expression. "Oh my God, Evanthe, have you seen this?" Nate rushed over to my desk the next morning, phone in hand. "You're famous!" The video had been shared hundreds of times overnight, with comments ranging from relationship goals to, "Isn't she married?" to, "That husband in the background looks like he's planning a murder." That last comment made my stomach clench, but I forced a laugh. It's just dancing. People need to get a life. "Are you kidding? This is amazing. You look incredible, and that guy is hot. Who cares what a bunch of strangers think?" But I did care, especially when my manager Priya called me into her office later that morning. "Evanthe, I need to talk to you about some concerns that have been brought to my attention." She turned her computer screen toward me, showing the video that was now making rounds on social media. This kind of public behavior reflects on the company. We've had several clients comment on it, and frankly, it's becoming a distraction. "It's my personal life," I said, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. "Your personal life became public when it went viral. And when you're tagged as working for our firm, it becomes our concern too." I wanted to argue, to defend myself, to point out that I wasn't doing anything illegal or immoral. But looking at the video from an outside perspective, seeing the way I was pressed against another man while my husband sat alone in the background, I could understand why people were talking. The worst part was the comments about Caleb. "That poor husband," one person had written. "Look how sad he looks." Another had said, "Imagine being married to someone who humiliates you in public like this." When I got home that evening, Caleb was in the kitchen making dinner. He looked up when I walked in, and for a moment I thought I saw something flicker across his face, hurt, maybe, or disappointment. But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "How was work?" he asked, stirring something on the stove. "Fine," I lied. "How was yours?" "Productive. I got a lot done today." He served dinner in silence, and we ate while the elephant in the room grew larger and larger. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. "I suppose you've seen the video." "Which video?" His tone was so neutral that I couldn't tell if he was genuinely asking or just making me spell it out. "The one of me and Rafa dancing. It's been all over social media." "Oh, that one. Yes, I saw it." "And?" Caleb took a careful bite of his pasta, chewed thoughtfully, and swallowed before answering. "And what?" "Aren't you going to say something? Aren't you angry?" Should I be angry? The question caught me off guard. I'd been prepared for accusations, for demands to stop seeing Rafa, for some kind of emotional reaction. But this calm interrogation was somehow worse than anger would have been. I don't know. Most husbands would be upset if their wives were dancing with other men in viral videos. Most wives wouldn't be dancing with other men in viral videos. The observation hit like a slap. "It was just dancing, Caleb." "I know, you keep saying that." "Because it's true." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not anger, not hurt, but something colder, something final. "Evanthe, do you think I'm stupid?" The question was asked so quietly, so matter-of-factly, that it took me a moment to process it. "Of course not. Why would you ask that?" "Because you keep telling me things that we both know aren't true, and I'm wondering if you think I'm too stupid to see what's actually happening." "Nothing is happening." "Okay." He went back to eating his pasta. "If you say so, But the way he said it made it clear he didn't believe me. And the worst part was, I wasn't sure I believed myself anymore. Later that night, I found Caleb in his study again, this time with printed screenshots of the video spread across his desk. He was making notes on a legal pad, writing in his careful, precise handwriting. "What are you doing?" "Research," he said without looking up. "Research on what?" "Various things." I moved closer, trying to see what he was writing, but he casually moved his arm to block my view. "Caleb, you're scaring me. What kind of research?" He finally looked up and his expression was perfectly calm. "The kind that helps me understand my options." "Options for what?" "For moving forward." The phrase sent ice through my veins. "Moving forward with what?" "With my life, Evanthe. With or without you." I stared at him, waiting for him to soften the statement, to reassure me, to show some sign that he was just trying to scare me into better behavior. But he simply went back to his notes, dismissing me as effectively as if I'd never been there. That night, lying alone in our bed again, I realized that somewhere along the way, the dynamic in our marriage had shifted completely. I'd thought I was the one with the power, the one making choices, the one in control of the situation. But looking back at the video, seeing myself through the eyes of strangers, I began to understand that I might have been wrong about everything. And my husband, quiet, methodical, boring Caleb, might have been planning something all along. The third video was the one that changed everything. It happened at another one of Rafa's events, this time at an upscale lounge downtown. I'd told Caleb I was having dinner with Lydia, but when Rafa texted asking me to stop by, I couldn't resist. The music was good, the crowd was energetic, and for a few hours, I felt like my old self again. The woman who used to turn heads, who used to be the life of the party. What I didn't know was that Caleb had started tracking my location through our shared phone plan. What I didn't realize was that he'd been documenting every lie, every inconsistency, every time I'd said I was one place when I was actually somewhere else. This time, when someone filmed Rafa and me dancing, closer than before, more intimate than before, Caleb wasn't sitting in the background. He was nowhere to be seen, but somehow the video still found its way to him within hours of being posted. I woke up the next morning to find him sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open, the video playing on repeat. He had a notebook beside him, and he was writing down timestamps, noting specific moments, creating what looked like a detailed analysis of everything I'd done wrong. "We need to talk," he said without looking up. My stomach dropped. "About what?" "About this." He turned the laptop toward me, showing the video that had already been shared hundreds of times. "And about the fact that you told me you were having dinner with Lydia last night." I scrambled for an explanation, a justification, anything that would make this look less damning than it was. "I was going to have dinner with her, but she cancelled last minute, and then Rafa texted, and I just stopped by for a few minutes. Evanthe." His voice was quiet, but it cut through my rambling like a knife. "Stop." "Stop what?" "Stop lying to me. Stop lying to yourself. Stop pretending that what you're doing is innocent when we both know it isn't." I felt tears prick at my eyes, not from guilt, but from frustration. Why can't you just trust me? Why do you have to make everything into some kind of investigation? Because you've given me no choice. He closed the laptop and looked at me directly. Because every time I've tried to talk to you about this, you've lied to my face. I haven't lied. You told me you were with Lydia last night. You weren't. That's not lying, that's just... You told me Rafa was just a friend. Friends don't dance like that. We were just having fun. You told me nothing was happening. But something is happening, Evanthe. It's been happening for weeks. The calm certainty in his voice was more terrifying than any amount of yelling would have been. This wasn't the reaction of a man who was guessing or suspecting. This was the reaction of a man who knew. "What do you want from me?" I asked, and I hated how small my voice sounded. "I want you to decide what you want, because I'm done waiting for you to figure it out." What's that supposed to mean? It means I've been patient. I've been understanding. I've given you space and time and every opportunity to choose our marriage. But you keep choosing him. That's not true, isn't it? He opened the notebook and started reading from his careful notes. October 15th, told me you were working late, but your location showed you at the rooftop bar with Rafa until 11 p.m. October 22nd, said you were shopping with your sister, but your credit card was used at the restaurant where Rafa was hosting an event. October 28th. Stop. I felt sick listening to the litany of my deceptions laid out so methodically. Just stop. I have 3 weeks of this, Evanthe. 3 weeks of lies and cover-ups and watching my wife choose another man over and over again. It's not like that. Then what is it like? I opened my mouth to explain, to justify, to make him understand that it wasn't about choosing Rafa over him. It was about choosing excitement over boredom, passion over routine, feeling alive over feeling invisible. But looking at the hurt in his eyes, the careful way he'd documented every betrayal, I realized that all my explanations would sound like excuses. I don't know, I whispered. Well, I do. He stood up and gathered his notebook and laptop. I know exactly what this is, and I know what I need to do about it. Caleb, please, can't we just talk about this? Can't we work it out? We could have worked it out 3 weeks ago, or 2 weeks ago, or last week. But you weren't interested in working it out then. You were interested in sneaking around and lying to me and making me feel like I was crazy for noticing that my wife was having an affair. I'm not having an affair. He paused in the doorway and looked back at me. Evanthe, if you were single, would you be sleeping with him by now? The question hit me like a physical blow because the answer was yes, and we both knew it. That's what I thought, he said quietly. The only reason you haven't crossed that line yet is because you're married to me, and that's not enough anymore. He left for work without another word, and I spent the day in a panic, calling Lydia, texting Rafa, trying to figure out how to fix what felt increasingly unfixable. You need to end it with Rafa, Lydia said when she came over that evening. Whatever this is, you need to end it now before Caleb does something drastic. Like what? He's not going to do anything. He's too passive. Evanthe, passive people don't keep detailed logs of their spouse's activities. Passive people don't track locations and document lies. That man is planning something, and you need to take it seriously. But I didn't want to take it seriously. I wanted to believe that Caleb was bluffing, that his threats were empty, that he'd eventually calm down, and we'd go back to our comfortable, predictable routine. I was wrong about that too. That night, I found a manila envelope on my pillow with my name written on it, in Caleb's careful handwriting. Inside were printouts of every lie I'd told, every location I'd been tracked to, every inconsistency in my stories. At the bottom was a single sheet of paper with an appointment time and address. What's this? I asked, finding him in his study. Documentation, he said, without looking up from his computer. Documentation of what? Everything you've done, everything you've said, everything you've chosen. Why? He finally looked at me, and his expression was perfectly calm. Because I'm done pretending this isn't happening, and I'm done letting you make me feel like I'm the problem. I never said you were the problem. You didn't have to say it. You showed it, every time you chose to be with him instead of me, every time you lied to my face, every time you made me feel like I was paranoid for noticing that my wife was falling in love with someone else. I'm not falling in love with him. Okay, he said, turning back to his computer. If you say so. But we both knew I was lying again, and we both knew he was done believing my lies. The appointment on the paper was for the next morning. The address was for a law office downtown. For the first time since this whole thing started, I began to understand that my husband wasn't just keeping score. He was building a case, and I was about to find out what the verdict would be. The process server arrived on a Thursday morning while I was having coffee with Lydia in our kitchen. I'd been telling her about my growing panic, about Caleb's mysterious appointment, about the way he'd been treating me like a stranger in our own home. "Maybe you should talk to him," she was saying. "Really talk to him. Tell him you'll stop seeing Rafa, that you want to work on the marriage." The doorbell interrupted her. Through the peephole, I could see a woman in a business suit holding a clipboard and a manila envelope. "Evanthe Quill?" she asked when I opened the door. "Yes?" "You've been served." She handed me the envelope, had me sign the clipboard, and walked away before I could fully process what was happening. My hands were shaking as I tore open the envelope. The words, "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage," were printed in bold letters across the top of the first page. Below that, in careful legal language, was a detailed account of irreconcilable differences, emotional abandonment, and adultery. "Oh my God," Lydia breathed, reading over my shoulder. "He actually did it." I flipped through the pages in growing horror. Caleb hadn't just filed for divorce, he'd filed for everything. Custody of our children, division of assets, spousal support, and attached to the back were exhibits, printed screenshots of every social media post, every viral video, every lie I'd told documented with timestamps and evidence. Exhibit A, video footage from the downtown club showing inappropriate intimate behavior with Rafa Torres while spouse was present. Exhibit B, credit card statements showing pattern of deception regarding whereabouts and activities. Exhibit C, phone records showing extensive communication with Rafa Torres during work hours and family time. Exhibit D, social media posts showing public humiliation of marriage and spouse. There were 12 exhibits in total, each one more damning than the last. Caleb had built an airtight case against me, documenting every moment of my affair with the precision of a forensic accountant. "This can't be legal," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He can't just divorce me without warning." "He did warn you," Lydia said quietly. "You just didn't listen." "But I haven't done anything wrong. I never slept with Rafa. I never—" "Evanthe." Lydia's voice was gentle but firm. "Look at this evidence. Look at these photos. If you were sitting on a jury, what would you think?" I looked at the screenshots again, seeing them through the eyes of strangers. The way I was pressed against Rafa in every photo. The way I looked at him like he was the only person in the room. The way I'd systematically lied to my husband while carrying on an emotional affair in public. "I need to call him," I said, reaching for my phone. "I need to explain." "He's not going to answer," Lydia said. "Look at the last page." I flipped to the end of the document and found a restraining order. Temporary, but legally binding. I was prohibited from contacting Caleb directly, from entering his workplace, from interfering with his legal proceedings. "He thought of everything," I whispered. "He's a smart man, Evanthe. You always said so yourself." I spent the rest of the day calling lawyers, trying to understand my options, trying to figure out how to fight back against what felt like an ambush. But every attorney I spoke to said the same thing. Caleb's case was solid, his evidence was comprehensive, and my chances of disputing the divorce were minimal. "The best thing you can do is cooperate," one lawyer told me. "Make this as amicable as possible and hope for a fair settlement." But what about my side of the story? What about the fact that he was emotionally unavailable? What about the fact that he drove me to this? "Ma'am, emotional unavailability isn't grounds for adultery, and from what you've described, your husband has documentation showing he attempted to address the marriage issues while you were pursuing another relationship." That night, I sat alone in our apartment, my apartment now, I supposed, staring at the divorce papers and trying to figure out where everything had gone wrong. When had my quiet, predictable husband become a master strategist? When had my harmless flirtation become a legal case study in adultery? My phone buzzed with a text from Rafa. "Hey beautiful, want to grab dinner tonight?" For the first time since this whole thing started, The message didn't fill me with excitement. Instead, it made me feel sick. This was what I'd thrown my marriage away for. A man who didn't even know I'd been served with divorce papers, who treated our relationship like a casual fling, who would probably disappear the moment things got complicated. I called him instead of texting back. "Rafa, I need to tell you something. Caleb filed for divorce today." There was a long pause. "Wow, that's heavy. Are you okay?" "No, I'm not okay. My husband is divorcing me, and he has evidence of our entire relationship. Photos, videos, documentation of every time we've been together." "Look, Evanthe, I'm really sorry this is happening, but we both knew this was complicated. We both knew you were married." "So that's it? That's all you have to say?" "What do you want me to say? I can't fix your marriage. I can't change what happened. We had fun together, but I never promised you anything more than that." The casual dismissal hit me like a slap. This was the man I'd risked everything for. This was the relationship I'd chosen over my marriage. "You're right," I said quietly. "You never promised me anything. That was my mistake." I hung up and looked around the apartment that suddenly felt too big and too empty. All of Caleb's things were gone. His books, his coffee mug, his careful stacks of organized papers. He'd moved out while I was at work, taking only what belonged to him and leaving no trace of his presence except for a single note on the kitchen counter. "I'll be in touch through my attorney regarding custody arrangements and asset division. Please don't contact me directly. C." Even his goodbye was methodical and precise. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat down with the divorce papers again, reading through each exhibit with growing shame. This was my life laid out in legal language. Every lie, every deception, every moment I'd chosen excitement over loyalty. And at the bottom of each page was Caleb's signature, neat and decisive, finalizing the end of our marriage with the same careful attention he brought to everything else. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I understood that my husband hadn't been passive or indifferent. He'd been patient. He'd been gathering evidence. He'd been giving me every opportunity to choose our marriage, while documenting what happened when I chose something else instead. And now he was done waiting. The next morning, I woke up to find that the viral videos had taken on a new life online. Someone had connected them to the divorce filing, and now I wasn't just the woman dancing with another man. I was the woman who'd destroyed her marriage for a few moments of attention. The comments were brutal, and for the first time, they weren't taking my side. "Play with fire, get burned." That poor husband, he deserves so much better. This is what happens when you think the grass is greener. Hope it was worth it. I wanted to defend myself, to explain that it wasn't that simple, that marriage was complicated and people made mistakes. But looking at the evidence Caleb had compiled, I realized that from the outside, it really was that simple. I'd had a choice between my marriage and my affair, and I'd chosen the affair. Everything else was just excuses. My phone rang, and for a moment, my heart leaped, thinking it might be Caleb, ready to talk, ready to work things out. But it was my mother. "Evanthe, honey, I just heard. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Mom." "Lydia told me about the divorce papers. She said Caleb has been planning this for weeks." "Apparently." "Do you want to talk about what happened? Do you want to come stay with us for a while?" I almost said yes. I almost gave in to the urge to run home to my parents and let them take care of me like I was a child who'd made a mistake. But I was 32 years old, and this wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. A series of choices that had led me exactly where I was sitting. "No, Mom, I need to deal with this myself." "Okay, honey, but if you change your mind..." "I know. Thank you." After I hung up, I sat in the silence of my empty apartment and tried to figure out what came next. Caleb had outmaneuvered me completely, but maybe that wasn't entirely a bad thing. Maybe it was time to stop fighting and start accepting responsibility for what I'd done. Maybe it was time to let him win. The courthouse steps were busier than I'd expected on a Tuesday morning. Lawyers in expensive suits hurried past with briefcases, families gathered in nervous clusters, and somewhere in that crowd was my husband, waiting to officially end our marriage. I dressed carefully that morning, not too casual, not too formal, nothing that could be interpreted as either an attempt to seduce or a sign of disrespect. Even now, facing the end of everything, I was still thinking about how things would look to other people. Some habits die hard. My lawyer, a kind but practical woman named Sarah Chen, met me at the entrance. "Are you ready for this, Evanthe?" "As ready as I can be." "Remember what we discussed. The settlement is fair given the circumstances. Caleb's attorney has been reasonable about the asset division, and the custody arrangement is standard for situations like this. Situations like this, as if there were a category for women who'd thrown away their marriages for viral videos and the attention of men who disappeared the moment things got complicated. We walked through the metal detectors and down the long hallway to the family court section, and there, sitting on a bench outside the courtroom, was Caleb. He looked the same as always, neat khakis, button-down shirt, hair combed with mathematical precision. But there was something different about the way he carried himself, more confident maybe, more decisive, like he'd finally found his footing after months of uncertainty. Next to him sat his mother, Helen, who'd been nothing but kind to me during our marriage, but who now looked at me with the polite distance reserved for strangers. On his other side was a woman I didn't recognize, mid-40s, professional attire, probably his attorney. Evanthe. Caleb stood when he saw me approaching. Even now, even after everything, his manners were impeccable. "Caleb." I wanted to say more, to apologize, to explain, to somehow make him understand that I'd never meant for things to go this far. But his attorney stepped forward before I could find the words. "Mrs. Quill, I'm Jennifer Walsh, representing your husband. I believe our clients have reviewed the settlement terms." "Yes," Sarah answered for me. "My client is prepared to sign." And that was it. No dramatic confrontation, no last-minute reconciliation, no movie moment where love conquered all. Just lawyers and paperwork, and the methodical dissolution of a life we'd built together. We filed into the courtroom and took our seats on opposite sides of the aisle. The judge, a tired-looking man in his 60s, reviewed the documents with the same attention he'd probably given to dozens of similar cases that week. "This appears to be an uncontested dissolution, with agreed-upon terms for custody, support, and asset division," he said, looking between Caleb and me. "Are both parties satisfied with these arrangements?" "Yes, Your Honor," Caleb said clearly. "Yes, Your Honor," I echoed, though my voice came out smaller than I'd intended. "Very well. I hereby grant the petition for dissolution of marriage. The terms of the settlement are legally binding as of today's date. Court is adjourned." The gavel came down with a sharp crack, and just like that, it was over. People began filing out of the courtroom, but I sat frozen in my seat, trying to process that my marriage had just ended with less ceremony than a traffic court hearing. 8 years of shared life, reduced to a legal procedure that took less than 10 minutes. "Evanthe," Sarah touched my arm gently. "We should go. You'll receive copies of all the final documents within the week." Evanthe leaves the courthouse with her folder of papers and sees Caleb by the door with his mother. She stops him anyway and apologizes for the lies, the humiliation, and for making him feel like he had to document everything just to prove he wasn't crazy. Caleb admits he believes she's sorry, and says he's sorry too, but he won't rewrite the ending. Maybe it could have worked with different choices, maybe not, but they both made their choices, and now they live with them. He tells her to take care of herself, then walks out with quiet, final dignity. Outside, Evanthe gets a text from Rafa asking to celebrate her freedom. She deletes it and calls Lydia instead, admitting it feels like she threw away the best thing in her life for the worst reasons. Lydia doesn't excuse it, but reframes it. Maybe this breakup forces the truth. Evanthe can't pretend anymore. She was having an affair in every way that mattered, even without sex, and Caleb handled it with patience, planning, and self-respect. She sees a gossip headline using a viral photo to summarize her life, feels the familiar rage, then remembers Caleb's blunt question about Rafa and realizes her excuses were just noise. At home, she reads the settlement and sees how fair Caleb still was, even in divorce. The videos keep circulating, but she stops caring what strangers think and finally cares what she thinks. She got what she earned, and now she has to decide who she becomes next. 6 months later, she hears Caleb is dating someone steady and compatible, and she's genuinely glad. She's also learning to be glad for herself, not from attention, but from accountability. The videos remain a scar, but also a reminder of who she refuses to be again.